was alone in the hospital during my husband's final days. Other rooms were filled with families, laughter, and love. Ours was silent. No one came. When the doctor finally confirmed his passing, he handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a note in my husband's handwriting. "Open the safe. It'll all make sense. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." The steady beeping of the heart monitor had become my heartbeat. For 7 days, I sat in that hard vinyl chair beside Carlton's bed, watching his chest rise and fall like clockwork. Room 314 had become my whole world, and the loneliest place on earth. Down the hall, room 312 was full of life. Children laughing, chairs scraping, people rearranging flowers. Yesterday, I counted 12 visitors in that room, celebrating because their father had opened his eyes for the first time in a week. In our room, the only sound was the rhythm of the machines, keeping my husband alive. I'm Everly, 69 years old. Carlton is 71, though the man before me looked far older now. His hands, once strong and steady, were thin and pale. We'd been married 47 years, and I never imagined I'd face his final days alone. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Ross said softly from the doorway. His face was kind, but his eyes carried the weight of too many farewells. "How are you holding up?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine, doctor. Any change?" He shook his head. "His vitals are stable, but have you been able to reach your family?" The question hit harder than I expected. He had asked before, and every time I gave the same answer, a lie. "They're coming," I whispered. "They live far away." He nodded gently, though I could see he didn't believe me. Dr. Ross had been with us for 2 weeks, long enough to notice the empty visitor log, the bare windowsill, the absence of flowers or cards. "Is there anyone I can call for you?" he asked. "A friend, maybe? You shouldn't have to go through this alone." His kindness almost broke me. Almost. But after so many years, I'd learned to hide my pain behind calm words. "Thank you, doctor. I'll be all right." When he left, I sat back in the chair and looked at Carlton's peaceful face. Even now, he looked like he was waiting for someone. I had called our children. Mark, our son in Seattle, hadn't come. "Mom, I'm in the middle of a big project," he said. "If things get really serious, call me back." As if his father fighting for his life wasn't serious enough. Sandra, our daughter in Phoenix, had said, "Mom, I can't just drop everything. Flights are expensive. Dad's strong. He'll make it." That was 5 days ago. Neither had called again. I glanced around the sterile room, blank walls, one window facing the parking lot, and an empty chair that should have held one of our children. From room 312 came the sound of laughter and a badly sung birthday song. How did we end up here? 2 people who gave everything to raise their family, now forgotten in silence. I reached out and took Carlton's hand. It was cold, but I could still feel the roughness of years spent building homes, throwing baseballs with Mark, and braiding Sandra's hair. "I'm here, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm right here." The machines kept their steady rhythm, the only witnesses to our vigil, and outside our door, life went on. Families were reuniting all around me. Laughter echoed through the halls as children handed handmade cards to their grandparents. Everywhere there were small victories, smiles, embraces, moments of hope. But in room 314, there was only silence, only me, Carlton, and the quiet understanding that whatever came next, we would face it the same way we always had, together, but utterly alone. As evening settled in and visiting hours ended, I prepared for another sleepless night in that same chair. The nurses had offered me a cot, but I couldn't bring myself to leave his side. What if he woke up and I wasn't there? What if these were our last hours together, and I missed them because I'd chosen to rest? So I stayed awake, holding his fragile hand, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, and trying not to think about all the empty chairs that should have been filled. As the minutes blurred into hours, my mind drifted back to when everything changed. It was 11 years ago. Carlton had just turned 60. He'd spent 23 years working construction for Brennan and Associates, starting as a laborer, eventually becoming a site supervisor. He was proud of that job, proud of every wall, every roof, every home that stood because of his hands. Then, the economy collapsed. And so did everything we had built. I still remember the morning he came home early, his face pale and stunned. He'd been laid off, along with half the crew. At 60, with a bad back and hands worn thin by decades of labor, Carlton suddenly found himself competing with men half his age. "It's just temporary," he told me at first. "Construction always bounces back." But weeks turned into months, and the callbacks never came. Each rejection chipped away at him a little more. He'd leave the house each morning in his best shirt, carrying a stack of resumes and quiet hope, only to return every evening more defeated than the day before. That's when Mark began to pull away. Our son had always been ambitious, the kind of man who measured success by titles and salaries. He'd earned his degree, landed a big job in Seattle, married Jennifer, a woman from a wealthy family. When Carlton lost his job, I think Mark saw it not as bad luck, but as a failure. I'll never forget that Thanksgiving. Mark and Jennifer had driven down with the kids. Carlton was thrilled. It had been months since he'd seen them. He'd been out of work for 8 months, but he still tried to hold his head high. "So, Dad," Mark said during dinner, his tone light but cutting, "any luck with the job search?" Carlton straightened in his chair. "I've got a few leads. There's an interview next week with a landscaping company." "Landscaping?" Mark's voice carried just enough judgment to make everyone uncomfortable. "Isn't that a step backward?" Carlton's reply was quiet. "Work is work, son." Mark shook his head. "I just don't understand how you let this happen. Didn't you see it coming? Didn't you plan?" The room fell silent. Even the kids stopped eating. Carlton's face turned red, not from anger, but from shame. "Mark," I started, but Carlton placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Your father worked hard for 23 years, I said softly. "He didn't choose to get laid off." That's when Jennifer, usually polite and reserved, decided to speak up. "Maybe this is a chance for a fresh start," she said. "There are plenty of jobs for people Carlton's age. Walmart's always hiring greeters." Her words hung in the air like smoke. Carlton quietly excused himself and left the table. I found him later in the garage, sitting on his old workbench with his head in his hands. After that night, Mark's visits grew shorter. His calls became rare, and when Carlton finally found work 6 months later, doing maintenance for the school district, Mark barely even mentioned it. It paid half of what he used to earn, but Carlton was just grateful to be useful again. Sandra's reaction had been different, but just as painful. Where Mark pulled away out of pride, Sandra pulled away out of disappointment. She'd built a comfortable life with her husband, Derek, who worked in real estate. They had a big house with a pool, luxury cars, and their kids in private schools. Somewhere along the way, she started expecting everyone else to live like that, too. "Mom," she said once during a rare visit, "why don't you and Dad move to a smaller place? That house is too big for just the two of you." And clearly Dad's not making what he used to. The house she meant was the one Carlton had built himself. Every beam, every nail, every wall. It wasn't just a house, it was proof of his love for us. "We're managing just fine," I told her. Sandra glanced around the living room, frowning. "Are you, though? When's the last time you cleaned the carpets or updated the kitchen? Mom, you're living like poor people." Poor people. As if losing money somehow erased decades of work, of love, of dignity. The real breaking point came 2 years later, when Sandra called asking for money. Her third child had just been born, and Derek's business was struggling. They needed $5,000 for medical bills and mortgage payments. Carlton didn't hesitate. When Sandra called asking for help, he cashed out part of his small retirement fund and sent her the money. Even though it meant we'd be eating beans and rice for months, he never once complained. Sandra never paid it back. Worse, she never even said thank you. 6 months later, when Derek's business recovered and they took a vacation to Hawaii, posting photos of beaches and cocktails all over social media, Carlton didn't say a word, but I saw the hurt in his eyes. After that, The distance between us and our children became something unbridgeable. Mark's visits shrank to once a year, at Christmas, and even then, he always seemed in a rush to leave. Sandra would still call sometimes, but only when she needed something. Her visits stopped completely. Carlton began to blame himself. "I failed them," he'd whisper during his darker moments. "I was supposed to provide for my family, and I couldn't even keep a job." "You didn't fail anyone," I'd tell him. "You gave them everything." But deep down, I wondered if he was right. Had we somehow raised children who valued success more than love? Who measured their father's worth not by the man he was, but by the money he made? Sitting in that hospital room now, I realized something heartbreaking. Carlton had spent the last 11 years of his life trying to win back the respect of children who had already stopped seeing him. He worked overtime, took weekend shifts, pushed his body past its limits, all to prove that he was still someone they could be proud of. But in the end, none of it mattered. When he needed them most, when he was fighting for his life, they were too busy, too distant, too embarrassed to be there. The irony was cruel. Carlton had built houses that would stand for generations, homes filled with laughter, light, and family. But when his own walls began to crumble, when he needed someone to help rebuild his spirit, there was no one left. No one but me. There was always me. I squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar ring that had never left his finger in 47 years. "I'm still here, Carlton," I whispered. "I'll always be here." But as the machines hummed softly beside us, I couldn't shake the feeling that soon, even I wouldn't be enough. The end came quietly, on a Tuesday morning. The dawn broke pale and unremarkable over the hospital parking lot. I must have fallen asleep around 4, still holding his hand, my head resting against the rail of his bed. It was the change in the rhythm of the machines that woke me. Dr. Ross appeared within minutes, 2 nurses by his side, their faces calm but heavy with what they already knew. They moved gently, checking monitors, adjusting tubes, but I could see it in their eyes. "Mrs. Patterson?" Dr. Ross said softly, his hand on my shoulder. "I'm so sorry." I nodded. Words wouldn't come. I'd known this moment was inevitable, but the finality of it still hit like a wave. Carlton was gone. After 47 years of marriage, I was truly alone. The next hour passed in a blur of forms, quiet footsteps, and hushed condolences. The nurses were kind. They gave me time. I sat beside him for one last moment, studying the face I'd loved since I was 22. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, as if all the weight, all the worry, had finally lifted. When it was time to go, I gathered my things. That's when Dr. Ross appeared again, holding a manila envelope. "Your husband asked me to give this to you," he said. "He gave it to me 3 days ago when he was still awake. He told me to wait until everything was finished." My hands trembled as I took it. The envelope was heavier than I expected, something small and metallic inside, along with folded papers. "He was very specific," Dr. Ross continued. "He wanted you to open it alone." I thanked him and walked out into the morning light. The sun felt wrong, too bright for a day like this. The world felt too alive, too loud. I sat in my car for a long time before I could bring myself to open it. Inside was a small brass key and a handwritten letter, Carlton's careful script on lined paper. "My dearest Everly, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and you're facing the hardest part alone. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things, but most of all, for the times our children weren't there when you needed them. I need you to go home. In our bedroom closet behind my old work boots, you'll find the safety deposit box. The key in this envelope opens it. I've left something there, something I've been working on for years. Before you open it, I want you to know this. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. Even when everything else fell apart, when I felt like I'd failed everyone, you never stopped believing in me. The password is the day we met, October 15th, 1975. You were wearing that blue dress, and you laughed at my terrible joke about the weather. I knew right then that I'd marry you, even though it took me 3 months to ask. I love you, Everly. Always have. Always will. Forever yours, Carlton. By the time I finished reading, tears had blurred the page. I could hear his voice in every word. I could see him sitting quietly somewhere in that hospital, writing this letter while he still could. The drive home felt like a dream. The same streets, the same trees, the same house, but none of it felt real anymore. The oak tree in the front yard still stood tall, the one Carlton had planted when Mark was born, but the house felt unbearably empty, the kind of silence that no amount of memories could fill. 47 years of shared life echoed through every corner of that house, but now all that was left were echoes. I made myself a cup of coffee with shaking hands and sat at our kitchen table, staring at the small brass key that had already changed everything. For a long time, I couldn't move. Then finally, I went to our bedroom. Behind Carlton's old work boots, exactly where he'd said, I found a small fireproof safe I'd never seen before. The digital lock blinked softly, waiting. I entered the date that had changed our lives forever, 11/15/75. A soft click. The door swung open. Inside was more than I'd expected. Stacks of bills neatly bundled, a few thousand in cash, my grandmother's pearl necklace I'd thought was lost years ago, and several pieces of jewelry I hadn't seen since we'd packed them away for safekeeping. But what truly stole my breath was the leather-bound journal resting on top of everything. My name was written across the cover in Carlton's handwriting, and beneath it, a line that sent a chill through me. What they never knew. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first entry was dated January 3rd, 2013, Mark's birthday. Everly made his favorite cake today. We waited by the phone all day. He never called. She tried to hide how much it hurt, but I saw her crying in the kitchen later. I should have done something. I should have been stronger for her. I turned the page, my eyes burning. June 15th, 2015. Sandra called again asking for money, said it was for school supplies, but I saw on Facebook that Derek bought a new boat last week. Everly doesn't know about the Facebook account I made to keep track of them. She'd be heartbroken if she saw how they really live. I cashed in another CD to send Sandra what she asked for. I'll tell Everly it was a good investment that matured. Page after page, year after year, Carlton had written everything. Every missed holiday, every unanswered call, every sacrifice. November 24th, 2016, Thanksgiving. Mark didn't come again, third year in a row. Everly still set a place for him anyway. I found her throwing away the untouched plate after dinner. Told her we had a nice quiet evening, just the two of us. Called Mark to thank him for the flowers that never came. Left a voicemail saying how beautiful they were in case she checked the messages. December 12th, 2017. Sandra's youngest broke his arm. Saw it on Facebook 3 days later. No one called. Sent a card with money to help with the bills. Signed it from both of us. Everly still doesn't know her grandson was hurt. As I read, the truth began to unfold. Painful, devastating, but filled with love. Carlton hadn't just been documenting our children's neglect. He had been protecting me from it. Every card, every bouquet, every small gesture I'd thought came from our children, they'd all come from him. He'd built an illusion of care to shield me from the reality of their indifference. He'd spent years, and money we didn't have, creating a world where I could still believe that our family hadn't completely fallen apart. March 8th, 2019. Mother's Day is coming up. Everly's been cleaning the house all week, hoping one of them will visit. I can't bear to see her disappointed again. Ordered flowers, signed the card, love, Sandra, and the kids. Also bought a nice bottle of wine and told her it was from Mark. Sometimes I think lying to protect her heart is the most honest thing I can do. I had to stop reading. The weight of his love pressed against my chest like something physical. All these years, I'd believed our children still remembered us, that in some small way, we still mattered. But it had been Carlton, quietly carrying both of our hopes, both of our heartbreaks, alone. I closed the journal and sat on our bed, surrounded by the pieces of a love I had only just begun to understand. Carlton hadn't just been my husband. He'd been my protector, my shield against the truth, And he'd done it all in silence. He carried the pain so I could keep believing there was still warmth in the distance, still a trace of the family we once knew. The house felt different now. Still quiet, still empty, but alive with the echoes of a devotion so deep it defied the years. Carlton was gone, but what he left behind was more than money, more than memories. He left me the truth, the unfiltered, unspoken truth about who he really was. I spent the rest of the day reading, turning every page with both dread and wonder. April 15, 2018. Mark's company's in trouble. Saw it in the paper. Possible layoffs. He's too proud to ask for help. Sent an anonymous money order for $5,000 to his house. The note said it was from a satisfied client who wanted to invest in his future. Everly thinks I used that money to fix the roof. The roof can wait another year. By the time I closed the journal, I could barely see through my tears. I had spent a lifetime beside a man I thought I fully knew, only to discover that his greatest act of love had been the one he never spoke about. I stared at that entry for a long time. I remembered that spring, the water stains spreading across our bedroom ceiling, and how Carlton had insisted we delay the repairs. He'd said money was tight after some unexpected expenses. I'd assumed he meant the new water heater that broke down in March. The one he'd probably repaired himself to save money, so he could send it to our ungrateful son instead. I turned another page. September 3rd, 2018. Sandra's oldest started high school at that fancy private academy. Tuition is $15,000 a year. Derek's business is struggling again. Saw it in Sandra's posts. She hides the stress behind coffee photos and motivational quotes. Took out a loan against my life insurance policy. Sent the money anonymously as a scholarship from a local benefactor. Sandra posted about their good fortune, but never once wondered if her parents had anything to do with it. My hands were shaking. A loan against his life insurance, the very money meant to take care of me after he was gone. He'd given it up to put his granddaughter through school, a granddaughter who didn't even know our names. I turned the page again. October 31st, 2018. Halloween. Everly bought candy, hoping neighborhood kids would stop by. We got 3 all night. She tried to act like it didn't matter, but she kept glancing at Sandra's pictures of her kids in their costumes. Beautiful kids. Our grandchildren. I wonder if they even know they have grandparents who would give anything just to see them once. I remembered that night. The bowl of untouched candy, the empty street. Carlton and I sat on the porch for hours, pretending we were simply enjoying the cool October air. But we were waiting, hoping. Then came December 20th, 2019. Mark's son got accepted to Stanford. Saw Jennifer post about it. The boy doesn't even know we exist, but I'm proud of him anyway. College costs a fortune these days. Started selling my old tools one by one. Told Everly I was cleaning the garage, but really I'm building another college fund. Anonymous, of course. Maybe someday he'll know his grandfather believed in him, even if he never got to hear it. I had to set the journal down and walk away. Carlton's tools had been his pride and joy, each one carefully chosen, each one tied to a story or a project. I'd noticed them disappearing over the years, but he'd always had an excuse. Lent it to a neighbor. Donated to a young man starting out. Didn't need it anymore. In truth, he'd been dismantling his life piece by piece to provide for grandchildren who didn't even know he existed. I made myself a cup of tea and sat back down. Reading the journal felt like examining my own heart under a microscope. March 15th, 2020. The pandemic started. Everyone's scared. Called Mark to check on them. He answered like I was a telemarketer. "We're fine, Dad. I can't talk right now." 30 seconds. I worry about them even though they never worry about us. Everly doesn't know how many times I call. She'd be hurt if she knew how often they don't answer. May 10th, 2020. Mother's Day. Everly tried to act like she didn't care that neither of the kids called. She spent the day gardening, humming to herself. But I know that humming, it's what she does when she's trying not to cry. Ordered her a bouquet and a card that said, "Thanks for being the best mom in the world. Love, Sandra." The look on her face when it arrived was worth every penny. July 4th, 2020. Everly made a big dinner, hoping someone might stop by. Mark lives 2,000 miles away, but Sandra's only 4 hours by car. Neither came. We ate potato salad and watched fireworks on TV. I told her it was nice to have a quiet holiday, just us. She agreed, but I caught her staring at Sandra's pictures of their barbecue all afternoon. Page after page, year after year, each entry revealed a man who loved so deeply that he spent his final years protecting others from his own heartbreak. Carlton had built an entire fiction to shield me from the truth. A world where our children still cared, where we were still part of their lives. He'd paid for it with his savings, his health, and pieces of his soul. January 8th, 2021, Everly's birthday. The kids didn't call again. Bought her a necklace and said it was from Mark, and a silk scarf from Sandra. She was so happy, kept saying how thoughtful they were to remember her favorite colors. I didn't have the heart to tell her I've been buying her gifts from them for 3 years now. August 12th, 2021. Sandra's middle child broke his leg at soccer camp. Saw it online. We weren't told. Sent a care package. Games, books, snacks. Signed it, "From your grandparents who love you." I wonder if Sandra even told him who it was really from. November 25th, 2021. Thanksgiving. Everly cooked for 6 people even though it's just us. She always cooks for 6, just in case. They never come. We'll be eating leftovers for a week, but I'll never tell her to make less. Hope is sometimes all we have. By then, my tears were falling freely, but they weren't only tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. Because for the first time in my life, I truly understood the depth of Carlton's love. He hadn't just been my husband, he had been my guardian, my quiet miracle. He'd spent his final years doing the impossible, holding together a world that was falling apart, all to protect me from breaking with it. And in that moment I realized, even though he was gone, his love hadn't left with him. It was everywhere. In the creak of the floorboards he'd built, in the worn handle of his favorite mug, in the faint smell of sawdust still lingering in the garage where his tools used to hang. Carlton was gone, but the love he left behind would outlive us both. Carlton hadn't just been my husband, he'd been my protector, the quiet wall between me and the truth I wasn't ready to face. But as I kept reading, I realized something I hadn't before. Carlton hadn't only been shielding me from pain, he'd been keeping records. Every secret gift, every anonymous wire transfer, every unreturned call, all carefully documented with dates, names, and notes written in his neat, deliberate handwriting. December 25th, 2021, Christmas. We sent gifts to all the grandchildren, spent $800 we couldn't afford, but Everly was so excited picking them out. The packages were never acknowledged, no thank you calls, no pictures, nothing. Starting to think they throw them away without even opening them. March 18th, 2022. Mark lost his job, saw it on LinkedIn. Seeking new opportunities. Sent another anonymous money order, $3,000 this time. Had to borrow against the house, but I couldn't let him struggle. Told Everly the bank called about refinancing. She trusts me to handle the paperwork. By then, my hands were shaking. The journal had turned from a confession into evidence, page after page, a testament to both devotion and heartbreak. The final entries were the hardest to read. October 15th, 2022, our anniversary. 46 years married to the most wonderful woman in the world. The kids didn't call. They never do. But Everly and I danced in the kitchen to that old song from our wedding. She's still beautiful, still the girl in the blue dress who laughed at my stupid jokes. I'm the luckiest man alive, even if our children don't understand that. December 31st, 2022, New Year's Eve. Everly fell asleep on the couch before midnight. I covered her with her favorite blanket and watched her sleep. She looked peaceful, just like she did when the kids were little. I miss those days, but I don't regret any of it. Love isn't about keeping score. It's about giving everything you have and being grateful for the chance to give it. And then, the last entry, January 15th, 2023. Everly doesn't know about the chest pains. Don't want to worry her. Updated the safety deposit box today, made sure everything is organized. If something happens, I hope she'll understand that every choice I made was out of love. I hope she knows she was enough. More than enough. She was everything. I closed the journal and pressed it against my heart. It felt heavier than any book I'd ever held. The weight of 47 years of love, sacrifice, and silent endurance compressed into its pages. Carlton had given away our savings, borrowed against our home, sold his tools, all to help children who couldn't even be bothered to call on holidays. But somehow, even in that pain, he had given me something priceless. He'd allowed me to believe, for all those years, that our children still had hearts, that somewhere, beneath their distance and pride, they still remembered love. The truth was both devastating and beautiful. Our children had forgotten us completely, but Carlton had loved me enough to carry that knowledge alone. The day of his funeral arrived, a gray Thursday morning at St. Mary's, the same small church where we'd stood hand in hand 47 years earlier, promising forever. I arranged everything myself, the flowers, the reception, even the music. Father McKenna, who had known Carlton for 3 decades, spoke about a man who lived his faith through quiet service and unconditional love. 19 people attended. Most were neighbors. A few were Carlton's former co-workers from the school district. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought a tray of cookies. The Kowalskis helped arrange the flowers. They were the family we'd found when our real one disappeared. Mark and Sandra arrived 15 minutes before the service. They walked in together, immaculate, polished, and cold. Mark wore an expensive black suit, his hair perfectly styled, his shoes gleaming like mirrors. Sandra looked elegant in a designer dress and carried the same luxury purse I'd seen her post online. A Christmas gift from Derek that cost more than Carlton's burial suit. They sat in the front pew beside me, but the distance between us felt like miles. Neither said more than a few empty words when they arrived. Polite condolences, nothing real. During the service, I watched them from the corner of my eye. Mark checked his phone. Twice. Sandra dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, but her tears never came. It all looked rehearsed, performed, a display of grief for the benefit of strangers. After the burial, we gathered in the church hall. People shared stories about Carlton, how he'd fixed their leaky roofs, helped with school fundraisers, or quietly paid for supplies when budgets ran short. Every story revealed the man I'd always known, kind, humble, steady, and generous, the kind of man who gave more than he ever received. Mark and Sandra stood apart from it all, whispering to each other near the corner of the room. I caught fragments of their conversation, something about the house, something about probate, something about getting this settled quickly. That's when Mrs. Henderson approached, holding a small plate of food I couldn't imagine eating. "Your husband was a good man, Everly," Mrs. Henderson said softly, her voice trembling with kindness. "He helped my Tom fix our roof last spring. Wouldn't take a penny for it, said, 'Neighbors help neighbors.'" I nodded, remembering that day, the way Carlton came home with scraped knuckles and that quiet, satisfied smile. He'd never told me Tom was struggling after his heart attack, never said the roof was leaking badly. He just helped, the way he always did. When the reception finally began to wind down, people said their goodbyes one by one. The hall emptied until only 3 of us remained, me, Mark, and Sandra. We stood in the silence of folding chairs and fading coffee aromas, the flowers already beginning to wilt. "Mom," Mark began, his voice calm but cold, almost professional. "We need to talk about Dad's affairs, the house, the estate, all of that." I looked at him, this stranger who shared Carlton's eyes but none of his warmth. "What about them?" I asked. Sandra stepped forward, her tone dripping with the kind of sympathy that only sounds rehearsed. "We know this is a difficult time," she said, "but there are practical things to consider. The house is too big for you now, and keeping it up will be expensive." Mark nodded quickly. "We've been thinking it might be best to sell it. You could move somewhere comfortable, maybe a senior community. We'd help you find something appropriate." Appropriate. as if my home of 40 years, the one Carlton built with his own hands, had suddenly become inappropriate now that he was gone. "We can handle all the arrangements," Sandra added, her voice slipping into that tone she probably used at her boutique, polite but transactional. "List the house, divide the proceeds fairly. It would be easier for everyone." I stared at them. These two people I had carried, fed and loved beyond measure. Their father hadn't even been in the ground 3 hours, and they were already talking about assets. "Have either of you asked how I'm doing?" I said quietly. They looked at each other, confused. "I mean, emotionally," I clarified. "Have you asked how I'm handling losing the love of my life? Whether I'm scared, lonely, heartbroken?" Mark shifted, uncomfortable. "Of course we care, Mom. That's why we think you should be somewhere with more support." "What kind of support?" I asked. "Professional support," Sandra said quickly. "People trained to help seniors cope with—" "Seniors?" I interrupted. "Is that what I am to you now? Just a senior to be handled?" They both fell silent. "I see," I said softly. "And where were you for the past 11 years? Where was this support when your father lost his job, when he had to cash in his retirement just to help you, when he sold his tools to send money to grandchildren who don't even know his name?" The room went dead quiet. Mark's face drained of color. Sandra's perfect foundation couldn't hide the guilt that flickered across her face. "What are you talking about?" Mark asked, but his voice already knew the answer. I reached into my purse and pulled out the leather-bound journal. "Your father kept a record," I said. "Every anonymous gift, every loan, every time he saved you without you ever realizing it." Sandra's eyes widened. I don't understand." "The money order for $5,000 that helped your company," I said, turning to Mark. "That was your father. He took a loan against our house to send it." Mark blinked. That was from a client." I shook my head. "No, it was from a man who loved you enough to go into debt to protect you, even though you hadn't spoken to him in months." I turned to Sandra. "Your daughter's private school tuition, your son's medical bills when he broke his leg, the scholarships, the anonymous blessings you bragged about online, all from your father. He cashed in his life insurance so your children could have the education he never did." Sandra's hand went to her throat. We never asked him to." "No," I said, my voice steady now. "You never asked. You never called. You never visited. You just disappeared, and your father watched from a distance, loving you enough to break himself so you'd never know how far you'd fallen away." Their faces were pale, speechless, guilty. Mark ran his hand through his hair, the same gesture his father used to make when he was overwhelmed. "Mom," he said finally, his voice cracking. "We didn't know." "Of course you didn't," I said, "because knowing would have meant caring enough to ask. It would have meant calling, staying connected, remembering that your parents still existed." I opened the journal and began to read aloud. Mark's birthday. Everly made his favorite cake and we waited by the phone all day. He never called. She tried to hide how much it hurt, but I saw her crying in the kitchen later. Sandra's polished composure shattered. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to hide this time. "We were busy, Mom," she whispered. "We had our own families." "Too busy for a phone call?" I cut in. "Too busy to acknowledge the gifts we sent your children? Too busy to visit when your father was dying?" Mark's voice broke. "We didn't know it was that bad. You didn't tell us." "I did," I said, my voice trembling with exhaustion more than anger. "I told you he'd had a stroke. I told you he might not wake up. You said you'd call back if things got really serious." The words hung between us, heavy, final, undeniable. "Your father spent the last 11 years of his life trying to prove he was still worthy of your love," I said quietly. "He gave you everything he had, and more than he could afford. He protected me from knowing how completely you'd abandoned us, and he died believing that maybe, someday, you'd remember that he existed." Neither of them spoke. The sound of chairs being stacked in the adjoining room was the only thing that filled the silence. For the first time in years, I saw them not as my children, but as strangers standing in front of the wreckage they had helped create. I closed the journal and looked at my children, these polished, successful strangers who had once been the center of my universe. "And now you want to sell his house," I said quietly. "The house he built with his own hands, the house he worked 3 jobs to keep when you were growing up. You want to sell it, divide the money, and put me somewhere appropriate." Neither of them could meet my eyes. "Tell me," I said, my voice growing stronger, "what exactly would be fair about that? Fair would have been visiting your father while he was alive. Fair would have been calling him on his birthday or Christmas or just to say hello. Fair would have been acknowledging the grandfather who loved your children enough to sacrifice everything for them." Mark's voice was barely a whisper. "We made mistakes, Mom. We can do better now." I looked at him, this middle-aged man who still thought charm could erase years of neglect. "No, Mark," I said. "You can't do better now. Your father is gone. Your chance to do better died with him, in a hospital room where neither of you cared enough to show up." Sandra began to cry, real tears this time, not the staged ones she'd offered during the service. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I'm sure you are," I replied. "But sorry doesn't give your father back the respect he deserved. It doesn't repay the money he spent on your children while we were barely scraping by. And it doesn't fill the empty chair in that hospital room where you should have been." I tucked Carlton's journal back into my purse and reached for my coat. "The house isn't for sale," I said simply. "And neither am I." As I walked toward the church doors, leaving them standing in stunned silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. The sharp, cleansing satisfaction of finally telling the whole truth. 6 months later, I stood in the departure lounge at LAX, boarding pass in hand, heart pounding with a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in decades. My destination, Ireland. Specifically, County Cork, the place where Carlton's great-grandfather had been born before sailing to America in 1923. Carlton had dreamed of this trip. For years, he'd traced his genealogy following the Patterson line back to a small village called Ballyvourney. He'd shown me pictures of green hills and crumbling stone walls, saying, "Someday, Everly, someday we'll walk there together." But someday never came. There was always something more urgent, another bill, another repair, another sacrifice made quietly for children who never looked back. Now it was just me, and the dream he'd left unfinished. The money he'd saved, tucked away in that safety deposit box, was more than enough to make the trip. After the confrontation at the funeral, I'd heard from Mark and Sandra only twice. The first was a call from Mark, an apology wrapped in excuses and promises about healing as a family. I hung up before he finished his sentence. The second came as a letter, from Sandra's lawyer. He questioned the validity of Carlton's financial records and suggested there might be legal implications with the money he'd given away. I forwarded it to my own attorney with a short note. "Please inform Mrs. Derek Hastings that all of her father's gifts were legal, documented, and given freely. Any attempt to reclaim those funds will result in full public disclosure of the circumstances under which they were given." I never heard from that lawyer again. The flight to Dublin was my first time leaving the country, my first time on a plane in over 20 years. Carlton and I had always talked about traveling when he retired, but life had other plans. As the plane lifted through the clouds, I pressed my forehead against the window and whispered, "We're finally doing it, Carlton. We're going to Ireland." 3 days later, I stood in the village of Ballyvourney, population 847, staring at a weathered headstone in a small churchyard. The inscription was barely legible. Patrick Patterson, 1834-1889, beloved father and grandfather, Carlton's great-great-grandfather. I knelt and opened a small pouch I'd brought with me, a handful of soil from our garden back in California, from the yard Carlton had worked so hard to keep. I sprinkled it over Patrick's grave and said a prayer for both of them, the ancestor who'd found the courage to start a new life, and the man who'd honored that legacy through love and hard work. The church rector, Father O'Sullivan was a kind man in his 70s, warm-eyed and curious about my journey. Over tea and biscuits in the rectory, he helped me trace Carlton's family records, handwritten entries stretching back 2 centuries. "Your husband's people were farmers," he said, tapping the faded ink in the parish ledger. "Good people, from what we can tell, hard-working, honest. They stayed in this valley until the famine years when young Patrick decided to try his luck in America." Carlton would have loved to know that. "He always wondered about his roots," I said. Father O'Sullivan smiled kindly. "Then he already knew the most important parts," he said, "because the values that truly matter, they don't change much through generations. Hard work, faith, family loyalty." Family loyalty. The words echoed in my heart. Carlton had embodied every one of them, even when no one was loyal to him in return. That evening, as the Irish sun dipped behind the hills, I sat by Patrick's grave with Carlton's journal in my lap. I didn't read it this time. I just held it, feeling its weight, the same way I once held his hand, steady, warm, and sure. "I found them, Carlton," I whispered. "Your family. And they'd be proud of you." The wind stirred through the tall grass, and for a moment I could almost hear his voice, low, calm, full of quiet joy. He had built a life of love and sacrifice from nothing. And even in death, he had guided me here, to the place where his story began. For the first time since he was gone, I didn't feel alone. I felt anchored. I felt home. The priest's words, family loyalty, stayed with me long after I left Ballyverney. As I continued my journey through Ireland, I began to see that loyalty everywhere I went. Families gathered in pubs after church, laughter echoing across old stone walls. Children walked hand in hand with grandparents through village markets. Generations living together, not out of duty, but out of love. And I couldn't help but think how different things might have been if Mark and Sandra had inherited more than just Carlton's eyes. In Galway, I stayed at a small bed and breakfast run by a woman named Bridget, a widow about my age. Over breakfast one morning, she asked about my family. "I have 2 children," I said automatically. Then after a pause, "But they're very busy with their own lives." Bridget smiled softly, stirring her tea. "Mine too, love," she said. "But they come round when they can. Family is everything, isn't it?" I smiled back and nodded. I didn't have the heart to tell her that sometimes family isn't everything. Sometimes it's just a word that people forget how to live up to. That afternoon, I called my travel agent and extended my trip by another week. Then I called Mrs. Henderson back home, my neighbor and friend who'd been checking on the house. "Everly, how's Ireland treating you?" she asked cheerfully. "It's beautiful, Margaret. Everything Carlton said it would be," I told her. "I'm thinking of staying a bit longer." "Good for you," she said. "You take all the time you need. The house is fine, and that nice Mr. Kowalski's been keeping an eye on the yard." After we hung up, I sat by my hotel window, listening to the faint sound of Irish rain against the glass. That's when it hit me. I wasn't homesick. For the first time in my adult life, I was somewhere Carlton and I had never been together, and instead of feeling his absence, I felt his presence more clearly than ever. It was as if he'd been waiting for me to set him free from the weight of constant responsibility. Free from the quiet burden of loving people who didn't love him back. At the cliffs of Moher, I stood at the edge of the world, the Atlantic wind whipping my hair into my face. The view was endless. Wild ocean stretching toward America, waves crashing against rocks older than time itself. I took out Carlton's journal and turned to one of my favorite passages. "I hope someday Everly and I can see the world together. She's given me everything. Her love, her loyalty, her faith in me, even when I didn't deserve it. I want to give her adventures, memories, something beautiful to look back on." I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "You did, Carlton. You gave me something beautiful. 47 years of being completely loved." On my last day in Ireland, I wandered into a small gift shop in Dublin. I bought 2 things, a simple Celtic cross necklace for myself and a small stone engraved with an Irish blessing. The necklace was a keepsake, the stone, a gift for Carlton's grave. But before leaving, I saw a rack of postcards, landscapes of green valleys, ancient castles, and misty shores. Something in me stirred. That evening, in my hotel room, I wrote 2 identical messages. Ireland is beautiful. Carlton would have loved it here. I'm finally living the dreams we never got to share. I addressed one to Mark in Seattle, the other to Sandra in Phoenix, not because I wanted a response, not because I was ready to forgive them, but because Carlton would have wanted them to know that I was okay, that I had found peace in the one thing they had never managed to understand: love without condition. He had spent his life protecting them from consequences. I was done protecting them from truth. The flight home was bittersweet. I had fallen in love with Ireland, with its quiet strength, its warmth, and with the version of myself I'd found there. A woman who wasn't waiting by the phone for calls that never came. A woman who wasn't apologizing for existing. A woman finally free to live on her own terms. When I stepped off the plane in Los Angeles, Mrs. Henderson was waiting with a smile and a bouquet of flowers from my own garden. "You look wonderful, Everly," she said. "Different, somehow." She was right. I was different. I felt lighter, not because I'd left something behind, but because I'd finally stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Back home, I planted the flowers I'd brought from Ireland in Carlton's memory garden. A quiet corner of the backyard I'd turned into a sanctuary, the Irish soil mixed with California earth, soft and rich beneath my hands. It felt symbolic, a blending of past and present, of dreams and reality, of 2 lives still intertwined. That evening, the answering machine light blinked twice. The first message was from Mark, awkward, hesitant. "Mom, got your postcard. Glad you're traveling. Call me when you get back." The second was from Sandra, softer, but still empty. "Ireland looks beautiful, Mom. Hope you had a good time." I smiled sadly, then deleted both messages. Some silences deserve to stay unbroken. That night, as the sun set behind the house Carlton built, I sat in the garden among the flowers and whispered into the fading light. "You were right, Carlton. Love isn't about keeping score. It's about giving everything you have and being grateful for the chance to give it." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel loss. I felt gratitude, because even though my family had forgotten how to love, Carlton never did, and neither, I realized, had I. I deleted both messages without writing down the numbers. 3 weeks later, I was in my garden when a car pulled into the driveway. Sandra stepped out, overdressed for a casual visit, clutching her purse like a shield. "Hi, Mom," she said tentatively. "I hope it's okay that I came by." I didn't stop watering my tomatoes. "It's your choice, Sandra." She stood there, clearly waiting for a warmer welcome. When it didn't come, she tried again. "The garden looks beautiful. Dad would be proud." "Your father was proud of many things," I said. "Most of them you never noticed." She flinched but didn't leave. "I've been thinking about what you said at the funeral," she said after a long pause. "About the money Dad sent us, about everything he did." I turned off the hose and looked at her. "I want to pay it back," she said quickly. "All of it. Derek and I figured out how much Dad must have given us over the years. We want to make it right." I studied her face, searching for sincerity and finding mostly guilt. "And why would you want to do that?" I asked. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because we should have been there for both of you. Because Dad deserved better." I nodded slowly. Yes, he did. But keeping his money won't give him what he deserved. He deserved your respect while he was alive. He deserved phone calls on his birthday. He deserved to know his grandchildren. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "I know I can't change the past," she said, voice breaking. "But maybe I can honor him now." I looked at her, this grown woman who had once been a little girl riding on Carlton's shoulders, calling him Daddy, believing he hung the moon. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten who he was. "Keep the money, Sandra," I said finally. "Your father gave it freely, out of love. Returning it now would only insult that love." Her face crumpled. "Then what can I do? How do I make it right?" "You can't," I said softly. "Some things can't be fixed, only learned from." I started toward the house, then paused. If you really want to honor your father's memory, stop trying to ease your guilt and start being the person he believed you could be. Be a better mother to your children than you were a daughter to him. Sandra was still standing in the driveway when I closed the front door behind me. That night, I sat on Carlton's side of the bed and opened his journal to the last entry he ever wrote. If something happens to me, I hope she'll understand that every choice I made was about love. I understood now. Carlton's love hadn't been about enabling or avoiding conflict. It had been about shielding me from the weight of our children's indifference, giving me the gift of hope, even when hope was foolish. His greatest legacy wasn't the money he saved, or even the truth he left behind. It was the lesson he taught me, that love doesn't have to be returned to be real. It only has to be given freely. I closed the journal and looked around the room we'd shared for 40 years, the place where Carlton had written these pages late at night, while I slept beside him, unaware of the burdens he carried alone. Tomorrow, I'd call the travel agent. Maybe Scotland next? Or Wales. Carlton always wanted to see the countryside where his mother's family came from. There were still dreams to fulfill, and a love to honor. Not the kind wasted on people who never valued it, but the kind shared with someone who always saw my worth, even when I didn't. For the first time since his death, I fell asleep peacefully. Because I finally understood. Carlton's true legacy wasn't what he left behind, it was what he taught me, the courage to live fully, love deeply, and dream boldly. Even if you have to do it alone. Now I want to ask you, if you were in my place, what would you do? Have you ever had to let go of people who didn't value your love? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and before you go, on your screen now are 2 other stories from this channel that you won't forget. Each one is filled with the same kind of truth, heartbreak, and redemption that define what it really means to love. Thank you for staying until the end, and remember, sometimes the most powerful love story is the one you learn to write for yourself.